What's up, everybody? Welcome to Puzzle Huddle with Experts. We have another fantastic episode. We're here to discuss education and child development. And today we're welcoming Dr. Barbara Mullen. She's a career educator, Ph.D., school administrator, book author, and just a lot of cool titles. But if you could, to help us catch up with where you are academically, if you could explain your academic and professional background to us, that will help us all get locked in with where you are.
Absolutely. So currently I'm serving as a assistant superintendent of student services and supports at Cambridge Public Schools. I completed my doctorate in special education administration and organizational leadership at Capella University in 2015, where my focus was inclusive practices, students with disabilities, graduation rates, and Black students as well. And so right now, one of my key kind of research focus areas is around the intersections of race and ability and language acquisition and how that impacts the opportunity gaps for the students that we service.
All right, and before we get, because your professional expertise is very interesting to me. If you could tell me, as a child, what were some of your favorite toys as a child?
So my favorite toys were babies, and I say babies loosely. So that could be dolls, that could be baby dolls, that could be stuffed animals, Cabbage Patch Kids, My Little Ponies, anything that I could kind of personify or turn into a student or something I could caregive over. So those are my favorite toys.
And for you to have become a career educator, what were some of the influences in your childhood experience that might speak to why that became a path that you pursued?
Sure. So I would be remiss if I didn't first talk about my mother, who was a career educator. So she's retired, but not really, because we never really retire. But she started as a teacher, and she started as a special education teacher and then a district administrator as well. She retired from being an executive director of special education. And then she started her own business to help with high school completion for kind of overage, undercredit adults. And so that's something that she's been doing for the last few years since she retired. So that was my first. I was going to IEP or individual education plan meetings when I was like one.
I love this. My mom is a retired teacher. She worked away. She was an elementary school teacher most of my years, but before she retired, she was an assistant principal and a principal. So Puzzle Huddle is the product of a parent a person that was raised by a teacher. So special ed as an intentional focus. What kind of inspired that specific interest in your heart that you went on to pursue a PhD in that?
Yeah, so I wish I had like a really compelling story around it. I don't. My mother was a special education teacher, but when I actually started in mass communication. So my undergraduate degree was in public relations and mass comm. And so I actually started working in PR agencies. I worked at BET for a little bit. I worked in different places. And then something clicked, and I just decided that I didn't want to pursue that anymore. So I went into education, and they had a high need field. Special education is a high needs critical shortage area. So they said, you can go into math or you can go into special education. And I was like, I'm not going into math. So I told my mom, and I said, I'm going to be a special ed teacher. And she was just like, oh, look, those are my babies. Don't go into it if you are not committed. And being, never one to back down from a challenge, especially from my mom. I said, well, then I'm going to be committed. And I have not looked back ever since, even in pursuing superintendency, which is I'm an assistant superintendent now. But even in that, I always look at leading a school district from the perspective of what do students who have the most barriers to learning, what do they need, and then design the system around supporting them.
Yeah, just so I can update my definition, what I imagine for especially it's a legacy concept back from when I was a child. So if you could just fill in that space for me, what is the composition of today's special ed population and programming?
Absolutely. So the incidence, which is just meaning the frequency that a student is identified as having a disability, changes over time. So and with the population too. So with the demographic. There are certain ethnic groups that have a higher incident or identification of a particular disability, and some that are different. What we're seeing is a growth in the number of students identified as being on the autism spectrum. We are also seeing, primarily we see students with specific learning disabilities or challenges in like reading or math or writing. And then also we may run the gamut of having students who might have traumatic brain injury, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They may have some social emotional challenges or exceptionalities. And we also may have students, as students who I serve in my district, who are both having some disability challenges, but may have giftedness in another area. So special education is really a group of services. We've really changed over the years from it being a place where you send children and really like a suite of services you provide children so that they can progress through their education.
Can you help me understand what might be the difference between special education as a normal part of a classroom experience with other kids versus special education that might be a dedicated school or a dedicated classroom? Like how does that sort itself out in terms of where a student might find their best experience?
Absolutely. So the one thing that is really, I would say, a benefit, and sometimes can be like a little hook in the plan, is that we are heavily regulated by federal law. And so the law tells us a lot of like the parameters in which we can identify students and place them in special education, or give them services, place them in the like umbrella of services. And so the first kind of step is really making sure, checking to see if a student is having struggles or challenges, or if they already come to school to us with challenges. And a lot of parents really, we're working, I think the field is changing to really work with parents to help them identify that early on, because the earlier that you identify your child needs support, or a teacher does, then the better set up they are to have that support throughout their education career. And then the other piece is that there is a team of people that really make that decision. So one person is not, even a parent, right, is not going to be able to say, I want my kid to go to that classroom over there. I don't want them to be in this classroom. I don't want them in that classroom, set away from other people. Or I think they'll be better in that classroom. It really is a whole group of people called like an IEP, individual education plan team, that meets to really have those conversations, to look at a full profile of a student, not just the disability, but like the strengths, the weaknesses, the areas of growth, like what do they enjoy, what makes them strong. And then from there, you kind of determine, does a child need to just have some supports in a classroom, come out with a special kind of teacher, with a special ed teacher for just a few minutes a day or a week, or would they be best served to learn the skills in a separate classroom and then kind of come in with their non-disabled peers for a minute at the time. And really that's determined by like the severity or the impact of the disability. For some students, they have significant exceptionalities. And so a separate classroom is going to be the best place for them. But that's a really low incidence. So we say that that's a very small population of students. Most students with disabilities really are able and capable of being in a general classroom with non-disabled peers. And so we really push for that, because we know that that's going to set them up for success when they leave us in the like post-secondary, after high school world.
In what ages are most of these, and you're referring to them as impacts? I guess it probably depends on how severe it is. Well, at what age are those characteristics starting to be revealed, where the parents or maybe even the teachers are able to identify that there's something that needs some additional support?
Absolutely. So it depends, right? So federally, there are 14 eligibility categories, that disability categories. And so
Right.
I named a few, right? But there's 14 federally that are recognized, that we would say, okay, this student has this particular disability challenge, and therefore they are eligible for services. Because there are some challenges that students have, but it doesn't mean they have a disability, right? It could be, food insecurity. It could be they've moved a lot of places. It
Yeah.
could be they have interrupted schooling, right? Like they may come from another country and they haven't had formal schooling. So that could be, it doesn't mean they have a
That's not
disability.
disability, right?
Yeah, it could just mean there's challenges to learning, right? And so a lot of the assessing that we do and that teamwork is really to kind of weed out a lot of different other things that there could be. And then if a student is eligible for under those categories, then we start to think about, okay, what's the best support? And so the law actually allows us to do it in like 2 steps, which is, 3 steps, which is birth to 3. So, with the advancement in technology, there are certain kind of developmental milestones that a child may make in vitro or like in the womb,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
That a doctor can begin to see, and they can tell a parent like, hey, your child may have Down syndrome when they're born. Your child may have this when they're born. So parents could know very early that they are going to need to set up support and have just prepare for the arrival of an exceptional child that's going to have different needs. And that's birth to 3. And then also a child could come, they could not know, but they might be seeing something where like, those developmental milestones that they're supposed to make, like walking or looking in the eye or grasping things, kids start reaching for things or rolling over. If they're not doing those things, then the pediatrician might say, hey, I think we might want to do some testing and see if there's some concerns. And so then after 3, there's kind of another kind of catch-all. It's like pre-K, like pre-early childhood, pre-K to like kindergarten, where, we're 3 to 5, where we're really looking at that student, and we're responsible as school districts to go into the community and find those children. So we don't have to, like, parents don't have to say like, oh my goodness, something's going on. Your locals, if you see something happening, or a pediatrician suspects something is going on with your child, same developmental milestones kind of not being met, you go to your preschool, you go to the school district, and you say, something's going on with my child. I need them assessed or evaluated, and we're responsible for making sure we support families with that. And we send them out to preschools to do that too. And then once they get into the school system, there still may be some challenges, right, that are just not identified. But we start to then look at data. So we start doing like screening of children, universal screening, just with basic academics, with reading, with letters recognition, with social emotional interaction. How are they engaging with other children? And then just some basic things around school readiness that we might identify for kids. And then we would see, are they meeting it? Are they challenging? Are they having challenges? And what support do we need to put in place for a student? And one thing that's really important that I always tell families is it's okay to give your kid some time. Like my son is a student with ADHD and some other kind of sensory challenges, and he's a struggling reader. But he was not diagnosed with having a specific learning disability or anything else. He just had ADHD and needed some support. But very early on at like 3, they were like, oh, he's got social emotional issues. He's got this, he's got speech and language issues. And I have the benefit of being an expert in this field.
Yeah, he's blessed to have you as a mother. He got the right
So,
mother.
and I stand in the gap for other kids too, right? And so I literally said, no, parents have to consent to have testing done. And I said, no, he's 3, like give him some time. So there may be some things that parents might see, but I also encourage them, kids develop on their own on their own timeline, as we all do, right? And so it's not a race, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so I tell parents, really just keep looking for data, keep looking for evidence that your child is progressing and growing. And then when you start to see that they're really not growing, work with teachers, with the pediatrician and doctors to really start questioning, start like checking for things, because sometimes we rush to like, oh, my kid needs this, when really their brain just needs some space and time and love to grow.
Yeah. What encouragement do you have for parents? Because when we have kids, they're in our eyes and in our hearts, they're perfect. Like they enter the world perfect, flawless. They're going to be lots of wonderful, awesome things, and they're not going to be impeded by any developmental issues. But that is not always the case. So I would imagine most parents will start with denial and no, we just need more books, more blocks, more time, more
puzzles.
Yeah, more puzzles. We need to we're going to work through it. Like not my baby. My baby's perfect. But so how do you help parents catch up with what might be the more true reality of their child's development, and then helping them see that some solutions can help their kid have a normal outcome, instead of we can't just pray all these things away necessarily.
No. So I would say the first thing is like you talked about a legacy of understanding. So specialized services, or in some districts I call them exceptional student services, we're really like trying to move away from special ed, and I still use it sometimes, right? But the legacy of kind of understanding of specialized services, first, I think families come in with that. So they come in with their prior knowledge around it being a place where they send those kids, the like land of the broken toys. And that's kind of like where those kids go. And there's just this very like medically fragile mindset around it too. This, we call it the medical model of special education, where it's very institutionalized. And it really has this picture of sending kids to a separate place where they just go away forever, and you don't really see them integrated into the community. You don't see them having this self-sufficient life and this level of self-efficacy and self-determination that we expect and hope for our children, right? Parents kind of fast forward to like, oh gosh, my child will, I won't experience those milestones with my kid, like high school graduation, college graduation, weddings, children, jobs, all those things. And so that's like the first thing that parents see,
Right.
even when
we all the way to 40.
We all the way to 40. We're like, and so we begin, so parents begin, even me, right? Parents begin to mourn a future that they think their child won't have.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's really the first place they have to start, is that no matter what, right? Even if your child comes out with some very challenging physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, we have made so many gains and strides as a nation and a community around supporting diverse learners that your child will have a beautiful future. They will have a beautiful future in which, to the greatest extent possible, they will be self-sufficient, they will be loving, kind, and they will be able to do what they need to do for themselves, as long as, parents are able to kind of go through that very natural mourning and grieving process of what we consider normality, and then start the advocacy work and the advocacy piece and making sure their kids have what they need. Because as a community and education community, we're still not fully there yet. And that's part of the work that I continue to do. So that would be the first thing, is helping parents to really reframe how they think about getting specialized support. The other piece that I often encourage parents to think about is to think about, like, yes, and think about the future. What are the hopes and dreams you have for your child? Some are completely realistic and some are like really stretch, right? Because if your child is like completely visually impaired, then maybe like being a captain in the Air Force is not going to be the one. Like that's
Right.
not it, right? But it is thinking, what are the goals I want for my child? And like relentlessly pushing for them and advocating and not letting up, because it is a marathon. We're not going to wake up when the child is 17 and say like, okay, now I think I want them to go to college, or I want them to be post-secondary ready, when we have not had that conversation since like kindergarten. Like we really need to do that. So that's the biggest thing, is just advocating for your child.
Yeah, I can imagine if me as a parent, I know I'll be able to protect my child for a certain amount of time, but my imagination goes to the moments and the time of their life where I'm not in the space with them. I'm not in the environment. I'm not a parallel entity to help ensure that the world treats them in an equitable way. And that's it's just terribly scary to think of, how is my child going to experience the world, and how's the world going to treat them with their different abilities. But now that makes me think about the role of the community. For those of us that don't have, any training or skills to engage with kids with different abilities, what can we all do to help the parents of these kids and even the kids to have as normal of an experience as we can, so that the community helps them excel? If we're all kind of working in partnership, like what can the peer parents do to help those kids have successful outcomes?
So I would say, can you repeat that one more time for me? Just the
Just
last.
I'm just thinking about how the community can better support these kids. The parents and the teachers will have a very certain role, but there's aunts and uncles, and there's godmothers and godfathers and cousins and lots of people. How can all of us start to help these kids have good outcomes?
So one of the things I think that is so awesome about indigenous communities and like Afro-Indigenous communities, and just the way that we think, right, in Black communities, et cetera, those social institutions we have, like churches, like families, kinships, third, fourth, fifth cousins, family barbecues, all of those different places where we go and find community. There is not a quote special education part of church.
No,
Like there isn't.
no.
Now I will shout out my church in Houston area, Fort Bend Church, that actually did have, like they had a groundswell of students on the of children in ASD spectrum. So they would have an autism specific like children's church for kids that was kind of like
Wow.
low sensory. It was really awesome. It was very, very awesome. So that's like one example. But for the most part, when I grew up, you know, we would use terms like, oh, they're just different, that they're touched, they're just a little different, they're special. You know,
Yeah,
that's
we didn't
Johnny.
know
Now
anything.
y'all let Johnny be a part of the Easter play. And Johnny was like maybe nonverbal, but you would dress little Johnny up and he would be up there in the like little Joseph outfit with everybody else, right? So there are some places where it's just like, we understand that you are ours. And so it
Yeah.
doesn't
Oh
matter
yeah.
how you show up. We understand holistically that we will love you to life. You will have a part in the community. We will adapt, we will modify, we will make sure. There was a woman at my church when I was younger, and my mom used to do the children's church plays and stuff. And she was like, well, you know, can he just be like a little bunny somewhere for the Easter? He don't have to do an Easter speech. Can he just show up? And my mom was like, yeah, of course, we'll find something for him to do. And I have seen that time and time again. And so community members really can think about what a child needs and do that. Like it's not, you don't have to be a special education expert. You don't have to be a teacher expert. You know, if you're an auntie and the baby is, you see a child for who they are. And that's really why I talk about the intersections of race and ability, because when we are, you know, almost 80% of our workforce in the United States, our teacher workforce are white women. They identify as white women.
Right.
And increasingly students, we're still about 50-50 with students of color being identified as having a disability and white students as having a disability. And so we're half and half just about, but increasingly in urban districts, the population skews more on multilingual learners and Black students or Latino students and Black students. And so really what we have sometimes is a cross sections of identities where, you know, out in the community, that's you know, little Johnny, right? That's a little bit, everybody know Johnny a little special. Johnny talk a little slow. Johnny stutters sometimes. You know, Johnny got a little difference in his legs, so we just wait for him. Kids just wait. They're like,
Yeah, we
wait for
just
Johnny,
wait.
don't run. You know it, but because that is their kinship, we create fictive kinships in our communities. I say fictive as in like fictional, not
Yeah.
by blood, right? And so we create these kinships which then endear us to our children, to our class, our like cousins, et cetera, that we don't see the barriers. We just continue to try to remove them because that's our family, that's ours. But when you get into formal institutions like schools, like workplaces, even where that kinship, it does not translate. Like a lot of teachers say, I love my kids, but we still have identity differences sometimes, and they bring those biases. And so they may even create barriers where there are none for students with disabilities. And so that's why, because of their identities. And so that's why when we talk about how community members can show up for our white educators or the Black educators or non-educators of color, or even educators of color who don't have disabilities, the way that we talk about community is really important, because that's the first kind of mental model you have to have in order to see a student for all of their possibility and not just the disability. That's the first step, right?
Yeah.
And then keep creating spaces where kids can authentically show up, where it's low stakes, where they can be engaged like out of school time or like after school, before school, summer camps, you know, make it accessible for students with disabilities so that they can show up and participate. We have a lot of institutions, and I'm speaking from a Black American, somewhat middle class experience when I talk about these things, but there's a lot of kind of youth organizations, youth leaderships, like with NAACP and Black Greek organizations and, Jack and Jill of America and all of those different places where even we could do a better job of being accessible, to youth who are neurodivergent, youth who have physical disabilities or exceptionalities. And there are ways that we can open up and create spaces to allow for students who are differently able to really step into some of those community spaces.
Did you tell me your mother was a special ed teacher?
Yes.
She has really created an awesome legacy in you. I don't know if if she knew she was birthing the next generation of advocate, but she certainly has. Tell me about your doctoral research. What did you study for your PhD?
So I studied I studied inclusion, and I use that as like little I and not big I. Big inclusion is kind of the global conversation across multiple sectors around belonging and diversity and equity in that space, and ethnicity. I studied little inclusion, which is belonging in an inclusive classroom. So how we include students, how we bring them back from this kind of medical model, separate classroom when they have a disability or eligibility. So I studied the extent to which including students in the general education classroom impacted the ability for students, specifically African-American students, to graduate from high school, those rates. And basically, I just wanted to know, like, if we keep separating students throughout their K-12 experience, do we actually jeopardize or increase the likelihood that they will complete a high school diploma? And I specifically looked at a high school diploma and completion because students can go into transition programs. They can get a certificate of attendance with an IEP, depending on, the severity of their exceptionality or challenge. But I specifically wanted to look at fully credentialed high school diplomas for Black students. And I looked at a large urban school district, the fourth largest in the nation. And I really looked at the extent, I looked at about 3 different years of graduation data, and then, how students were coded and where they were sitting, where their seats were. I didn't actually go into, they give you a chapter 5 at the end, like, what's the implications for further research? Yeah. And what I found was that, implication for further research is that just having seats in the chair is not enough. So just saying like, okay, yeah, you have a disability, sure, you can sit in the classroom. It's not enough. You have to build a culture of inclusive practices. And that starts with the educator mindset. So a lot of what I talked about before. So much of the latter part of the research that I did in that dissertation was really about how to shift educator mindset to be more inclusive. And that led me into the big I, which is really this sense of belonging, identity, and really how you show up as an educator into a space to create a learning experience that's welcome for every student.
Yeah, I just imagine with different populations, some parents having, more freedom to be engaged and help guide their child's experience. If you think it's socioeconomically, if a single parent household or a parent with 2 jobs and just less, and maybe less college education and less acumen and awareness to engage and help get their kid on the path that is, going to be the best for them. How can parents that, don't have that background, don't have awareness in their network, and maybe don't have the free time because their work life doesn't create the freedom for them to be as active? Gosh, but your child is your child, right? So you know nobody's going to support your child the way that you can. What it just creates a challenging situation is what I'm talking myself through.
Yeah. So I would say advocacy. So there, and you don't have to do it alone. So there are supports that exist in communities. Like there are parent advocacy groups that are free. Right. They just don't, like here in Rhode Island, we have the Rhode Island Parent Network. In Memphis, there's Memphis Lift, which is like an advocacy organization. There's the ARC, which is a county-wide organization, but it's national. So almost every county in the United States, just about, has an ARC organization. There's Dorcas, DORCAS International, which supports with disability awareness. And provide supports for families. And so that's one place, like if you're just like struggling, and provide wraparound supports too. And we use that word when we talk about like a student having a disability is one thing, but there may also be some challenges with medical support, access to medical care, access
Yeah.
to food, access to housing stability, because we often see those kind of co-occurring when a student might have some either therapeutic needs or educational needs. That's kind of like a flag for us, like, oh, is everything else cool? Okay, it's not cool. So that's going to really impact if we can support that student too. And so we really try to connect families with that wraparound support in the area that they're at. And then if you're a parent like myself, like full transparency, vulnerability, I work a lot of hours. Like I work 14-hour days sometimes. I commute and then I have board meetings at night. And so I just am very grateful for my partner, for my husband, who is in a different field and they've converted fully virtual just about, so he can show up in a lot of different ways that I cannot. But for single parents or folks who don't have partners, it is really a challenge to just show up to meetings, to families. So I would say for working parents who are like 9 to 5, it's just a struggle to carry all of that. Lean into the schools and ask for flexibility. Say, hey, can you docu-sign the papers to me? Like, don't send it home in the backpack because the kid's not going to give it to me. I might forget to look at it, docu-sign it to my work email. Or, can we do a Zoom meeting now? We can Zoom for meetings where sometimes parents had to come in and travel and take a whole day off. So if they're saying, no, we want to meet in person, ask for a Zoom. If they're like, oh, we want to send home all this paperwork and the kid's backpack, nope, send it a DocuSign. So just really trying to find support for being as flexible as we can for families, or families asking for that flexibility is really important, and advocating, because it can be a lot. It can be a lot of work, and it's a long road. 12 years is a long time. It is a really long time to really support your child, because after high school, they don't really receive services in the same way. They are a different legislation, make sure that they have what they need in college or the workplace. And parents, once they're adults, right, once they're either 18 or 21, parents, they fall off. So if parents know that they want to set their child up, those 12 years or sometimes even 14 years are really, really critical for that advocacy and support.
Yeah, I think I have two more questions for you. I think
Sure.
I'm going to be able to set it off after that, at least for today. But in terms of sharing, I noticed that when a child may have a diagnosis, there could be a level of shame and embarrassment on behalf of the parent. But I wonder, in order to get the community to help and support you, sometimes sharing the nature and tone of your child's impact allows the community to rally behind you. How did you think through, or even if you have, sharing, what your child's impact is, to create awareness? Did you tell people, or is that kind of information that you withhold in yourself until it's required to be disclosed?
So the good thing is that in schools, the training is really around looking. So we kind of don't wait for kids to show that there's challenges. We're like constantly looking all the time. And COVID has really heightened that, because students are coming back. And I just want a PSA, right, for parents, the kids will be all right. Okay, I work with kids every day. I see them every day. I'm looking at data every day. The kids gonna be okay. Okay, the adults, we still trying to rebound with this gas prices and everything, and it may not be toilet paper on the shelves, but the kids will be fine because they are resilient, amazing human beings, and they will be fine. But we still looking. So we're still, like, for those kids that are coming back with some challenges, we're looking for that. And so a lot of times a school will come and ask, but for parents, I disclosed very early on. They started to say, like, okay, well, your child is having some challenges, and have they been screened, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I went to go get some testing and work with the pediatrician and work with the neuropsychologist to be able to get testing and really doing this complete work, which is a lift. And I have the privilege of doing it, but school districts will do it as well. And so it's important that, like, don't hide it, because schools play a very big role in being able to support the student to get what they need. And I've seen it, like, I've been in education long enough to see, to go from having a student in 5th grade when I first started teaching, who, like, needed some advocacy and some support, to, like, connecting with her and finding out she's graduating from college. Like that to me that's the end game, right? Having a kid in my special education class and then seeing her graduate from college is just, that's it, right? Those are the bookends.
Awesome.
And
Yeah,
that's the why.
at the
So
graduation crying,
yes. So or
easily.
or just seeing like students I supported like graduating now and going on to college. So it's one of those things where, where it might, there are some parents who are like, no, my kid can do it. They can do it. I don't want you to further quote cripple them or anything like that. That is not the case. Like, you are the expert for your child, but we can't do it without you. And, disclose as soon as you can. And the other piece that I would say, always looking towards transition because the days are long, but the years are short for families, for parents. I'm sure your mother would say that. She'd be like, I blinked and now he's got his own puzzle company. He's just a little baby playing with puzzles and look at him now. And it goes so fast. And so you look up and it's time for them to go. And you ask yourself, did you do everything you could to set them up for success? So ask yourself that question now, knowing that these days are incredibly long, right? It's just sun up to sundown caring for your child. But then you look up and the years are so short and they're already ready to leave. And so disclosing the disability is so important. If there is one, disclosing if there's a challenge, but still advocating. Your child and you know what they need and what they don't, and what won't benefit them. So just leaning in is really important.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation about strengths. So when we've identified some impacts and some challenges, we may also have the ability to identify strengths and where my child is actually exceptional in a good way. What are some of the things that we see on balance if a child has a specific disability, things that we might be able to focus on in terms of their strengths? Are there trends that are normal balancing characteristics, or what might we see on the other end of the spectrum?
Say it one more time, balance.
Yeah, what do we see in terms of trends that might balance where it might be disabilities?
Okay.
If we're looking for strengths, what are some normal things that we might see emerge as strengths?
Yeah. So, it depends. It's I use the example of like, having a superpower, like if you lose one sense, another one is heightened, kind of in that way. And so there are some students, like I will use my son for an example, right? He has attention deficit disorder. And so he's really hyperactive in a lot of ways, but there are moments where he is super aware. It's almost like the Flash, right? So for the rest of the world, Flash is like, he's a blur. But then when you zoom into Flash's perspective, like it's moving at a snail's pace. And so I began to see the times where my son is like Flash, like boom, he's just moving. But then he parrots or echoes back to me some things that I just knew he didn't catch. I was like, oh, you heard that. Oh, you got that. Where did you hear that word from? Like, how did you pick that up? Oh, you made that connection. And so the synapses in his brain are just connecting so fast, but they're moving so fast that like sometimes it's just super hyper speed to us. And so we do have to slow him down because there are things he's not connecting that do require some very slow, methodical kind of focus. Mm-hmm. But then there are things that he zeroes in on and keys in on and is very self-aware. He himself at 7 is very self-aware, but there are things that I find that's his strength, right? And there's just a lot of different strengths. So I like to say cognitively, those are his strengths and some of his challenges, because oftentimes when we talk about kids' strengths, we don't talk about their cognitive strengths. We just feel like, oh, they got some cognitive challenges, but they're real creative. They love to draw. They're artistic. And it's like, no, we need something else. There's something else there too.
Yeah, we say that a lot. I see that all the time.
Yeah. Like a lot of kids are creative. That's what they're born to do.
Yeah. And last thing I want to ask you is for the parents. The name of your book is, I'm going to not get it completely correct, but it's something about putting on your mask before helping others.
Yes.
What should
your oxygen mask first?
Yeah. What should parents do? If they're supporting a child with special needs, a parent needs to have an amount of emotional health for themselves in order for them to be best available for their kids. What can parents do to stay recharged, to stay energized, to stay, on even emotionally, so that they can really be the best parent they can be for their kid?
Yeah, so I often talk about self-care outside of the trope of like take a bubble bath, go get a massage, go for a walk. Those are all great things,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm sure any mother can relate to like trying to take a bubble bath and a parade of kids just keep coming in and you're just like, really, guys? Like, can I just so that may not often be the key, and that may not be accessible to every parent, right? So I really like to talk about how to care for yourself by creating circumstances in which you don't have to do self-care, you don't do bubble bath. And the first step is like taking any and all help that comes, right? You do not have to
Yeah,
be a
yeah.
super parent.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to do it all. There are try to ask for help from the schools, ask from help from the community. The city often has time community supports. So ask for help. Don't be ashamed, even if you are not like a parent that has food insecurity, housing insecurity. Like if there are any supplemental programs in your city, state, wherever, get the help because it will free up your mental space of
Yeah.
worry. And
Uh-huh.
that anxiety, that stress, that's what bears down on parents, the not knowing, the scary future for your child. Give
Mhm.
yourself peace. Peace is the first step of self-care. And that's not a bubble bath because you just be sitting in that bubble bath worrying. So it's the peace that comes from really having a clear understanding of what support is available, what your next step is for your child, and where you're going to get the help and who's going to help you. And then I would say the next piece is if you are struggling with just the grief, loss, worry, and anxiety about what's going on, get some help, right? Get therapeutic help, talk therapy, all of those different pieces, because children present in disabilities in a lot of different ways that have a direct impact on parent stress levels. So if children might have, a disability around, social emotional health, and they're like acting out, or like the school's calling you every day saying, like, you got to come get Johnny because he hit somebody again. That's very stressful for parents because
Yeah.
they got to take time off work, and it interrupts their ability to make money. And so all those things. So get help. If you have employee assistance where you can do 6 sessions, do that. If you, again, work with the county, sometimes through your healthcare, if you have Medicaid or health insurance can connect you with a clinical provider for mental health support, do that, because you are only going to be as helpful to your children as you are to yourself. I have a therapist I meet with every Thursday, and we just talk about whatever. Sometimes I talk about my kids, sometimes I talk about work. But it is, we have to demystify it, and make it something that is just a part of our healthcare routine, right, for families. So those would be my 2 pieces of advice for parents.
All right. Dr. Mullen, this has been so informative for me. So thank you for sharing so openly and giving us such a great download. So audience, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to our channel so you can see our new videos that are coming. And thank you so much, Dr. Mullen, for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was a pleasure.